until we shall account to ourselves for the manner in which the idea of a supernatural divine world was developed and had to be developed in the historical evolution of the human conscience, all our scientific conviction of its absurdity will be in vain. Until then, we shall never succeed in destroying it in the opinion of the majority, because we shall never be able to attack it to the very depths of the human being where it had birth. Condemned to a fruitless struggle without issue and without end, we should forever have to content ourselves with fighting it solely. On the surface, in its innumerable manifestations, his absurdity will scarcely be beaten down by the blows of common sense before it will reappear in a new form, no less nonsensical. While the root of all the absurdities that torment the world, belief in God, remains intact, it will never fail to bring forth new offspring. Thus, at the present time, in certain sections of the highest society, spiritualism tends to establish itself upon the ruins of Christianity. It is not only in the interest of the masses, it is in that of the health of our own minds that we should strive to understand the historic genesis, the succession of causes which developed and produced the idea of God in the consciousness of men. In vain shall we call and believe ourselves atheists until we comprehend these causes, for until then we shall always suffer ourselves to be more or less governed by the clamours of this universal conscience, whose secret we have not discovered, and considering the natural weakness of even the strongest individual against the all-powerful influence of the social surroundings that trammel him, we are always in danger of relapsing sooner or later, in one way or another, into the abyss of religious absurdity. Examples of these shameful conversions are frequent in society today. I have stated the chief practical reason of the power still exercised today over the masses by religious beliefs. These mystical tendencies do not signify in man so much an aberration of mind as a deep discontent at heart. They are the instinctive and passionate protest of the human being against the narrowness, the platitudes, the sorrows and the shame of a wretched existence. For this malady, I have already said, there is but one remedy: social revolution. In the meantime, I have endeavoured to show the causes responsible for the birth and historical development of religious hallucinations in the human conscience. Here it is my purpose to treat this question of the existence of a God, or of the divine origin of the world and of man, solely from the standpoint of its moral and social utility, and I shall say only a few words to better explain my thought regarding the theoretical grounds of this belief. All religions with their gods, their demigods, and their prophets, their messiahs and their saints, were created by the credulous fancy of men who had not attained the full development and full possession of their faculties. Consequently, the religious heaven is nothing but a mirage in which man, exalted by ignorance and faith, discovers his own image, but enlarged or reversed, that is, divinized. The history of religions, of the birth, grandeur, and decline of the gods who have succeeded one another in human belief, is nothing, therefore, but the development of the collective intelligence and conscience of mankind, as fast as they discovered in the course of their historically progressive advance, either in themselves or in external nature, a power, a quality, or even a great defect, whatever they attributed them to their gods, after having exaggerated and enlarged them beyond measure, after the manner of children, by an act of their religious fancy. Thanks to this modesty and pious generosity of believing incredulous men, heaven has grown rich with the spoils of earth, and by a necessary consequence, the richer heaven became, the more wretched became humanity and the earth. God once installed, he was naturally proclaimed the cause, reason, arbiter, and absolute disposer of all things. The world thenceforth was nothing, God was all, and man, his real creator, after having unknowingly extracted him from the void, bowed down before him, worshipped him, and avowed himself his creature and his slave. Christianity is precisely the religion par excellence, because it exhibits and manifests to the full extent the very nature and essence of every religious system, which is the impoverishment, enslavement, and annihilation of humanity for the benefit of divinity. God being everything, the real world, and man are nothing. God being truth, justice, goodness, beauty, power, life, and life. Man is falsehood, iniquity, evil, ugliness, impotence, and death. God being master, man is the slave, incapable of finding justice, truth, and eternal life by his own effort. He can attain them only through a divine revelation. But whoever says revelation says revealers, messiahs, prophets, priests, and legislators inspired by God himself, and these once recognized as the representatives of divinity on earth, as the holy instructors of humanity chosen by God himself to direct it in the path of salvation, necessarily exercise absolute power. All men owe them passive and unlimited obedience, but against the divine reason there is no human reason, and against the justice of God there is no terrestrial justice. No terrestrial justice holds. Slaves of God, men must also be slaves of church and state, insofar as the state is consecrated by the church. This truth Christianity, better than all other religions that exist or have existed, understood, not excepting even the old Oriental religions, which included only distinct and privileged nations, while Christianity aspires to embrace entire humanity. And this truth, Roman Catholicism alone among all the Christian sects, has proclaimed and realized with rigorous logic. That is why Christianity is the absolute religion, the final religion, why the apostolic and Roman Church is the only consistent, legitimate, and divine church. With all due respect, then, to the metaphysicians and the religious idealists, philosophers, politicians, or poets, the idea of God implies the abdication of human reason and justice. It is the most decisive negation of human liberty, and necessarily ends in the enslavement of mankind, both in theory and in practice. Unless then we desire the enslavement and degradation of mankind as Jesuits desire it, as the Mormons, Pietists, or Protestant Methodists desire it, we must not make the slightest concession either to God or theology or to the God of metaphysics. He who, in this mystical alphabet, begins with A will inevitably end with Z. He who desires to worship God must harbour no childish illusions about the matter, but bravely renounces liberty and humanity. If God is, man is a slave. Now man can and must be free, then God does not exist. I defy anyone whomsoever to avoid this circle now, therefore let all choose. Is it necessary to point out to what extent and in what manner religions debase and corrupt the people? They destroy their reason, the principal instrument of human emancipation, and reduce them to imbecility, the essential condition of their slavery. They dishonour human labour, make it a sign and the source of servitude. They kill the idea and sentiment of human justice, ever tipping the balance to the side of triumphant knaves, privileged objects of divine indulgence. They kill human pride and dignity, protecting only the cringing and the humble. They stifle in the heart of nations every feeling of human fraternity, filling it with divine cruelty instead. All religions are cruel, all founded on blood, for all rest principally on the idea of sacrifice, that is, on the perpetual immolation of humanity to the insatiable vengeance of divinity. In this bloody mystery, man is always the victim and the priest, a man also, but a man privileged by grace, the divine executioner. That explains why the priests of all religions, the best, the most humane, the most gentlest, almost always have at the bottom of their hearts, and if not in their hearts, in their imaginations and in their minds. And we know the fearful influence of evil on the hearts of men, something cruel and sanguinary. None know all this better than our illustrious contemporary idealists. They are learned men who know history by heart, and as they are at the same time living men, great souls penetrated with a sincere and profound love for the welfare of humanity, they have cursed and branded all these misdeeds, all these crimes of religion, with an eloquence unparalleled. They reject with indignation all solidarity with God, with the God of positive religions, and with his representatives past, present, and on earth. The God whom they adore, or whom they think they adore, is distinguished from the real gods of history, precisely in this, in that he is not at all a positive God defined in any way or whatever, theologically or even metaphysically. He is neither the supreme being of Robespierre or J.J. Rousseau, Jean-Jacques Rousseau, nor the pantheistic God of Spinoza, nor even the at once eminent, transcendental, and very equivocal God of Hegel. They take good care not to give him any positive definition whatever, feeling very strongly that any definition will subject him to the dissolving power of criticism. They will not say whether he is a personal or impersonal God, whether he created or did not create the world. They will not even speak of his divine providence. All that might compromise him. They content themselves with saying God and nothing more. But then what is their God? Not even an idea. It is an inspiration. It is the generic name of all that seems good, all that seems grand, good, beautiful, noble, human to them. But why then do they not say man? Because King William of Prussia and Napoleon III and all their compeers are likewise men, which bothers them very much. Real humanity presents a mixture of all that is most sublime and beautiful with all that is vilest and most monstrous in the world. How do they get over this? Why they call one divine and the other bestial, representing divinity and animality as two poles between which they place humanity. They either will not or cannot understand that these three terms are really but one, and that to separate them is to destroy them. They are not strong on logic, and one might say that they despise it. That is what distinguishes them from the pantheistical and deistical metaphysicians, and gives their ideas a character of practical idealism, drawing its inspiration much less from the severe development of a thought than from the experiences, I might almost say the emotions, historical and collective as well as individual, of life. This gives their propaganda an appearance of wealth and vital power, but an appearance only, for life itself becomes sterile when paralyzed by a logical contradiction. The contradiction lies here. They wish God and they wish humanity. They persist in connecting two terms which, once separated, can come together again only to destroy each other. They say in a single breath God and the liberty of man, God and the dignity, justice, equality, fraternity, prosperity of men, regardless of the fatal logic by virtue of which, if God exists, then all these things are necessarily condemned to non-existence. For if God is, he is necessarily the eternal, supreme, absolute master. And if such a master exists, man is a slave. Now if he is a slave, neither justice, nor equality, nor fraternity, nor prosperity are possible for him. In vain, flying in the face of good sense and all the teachings of history, they do represent their God as animated by the tenderest love of human liberty, a master, whoever he may be, and however liberal he may desire to show himself, remains none the less always a master. His existence necessarily implies the slavery of all that is beneath him. Therefore, if God existed, only in one way could he serve human liberty, by ceasing to exist. A jealous love of human liberty and deeming it the absolute condition of all that we admire and respect in humanity. I reverse the phrase of Voltaire and say that if God really existed, it would be necessary to abolish him. The severe logic that dictates these words is far too evident to require a development of this argument, and it seems to me impossible that the illustrious men whose names so celebrated and so justly respected I have cited should not have been struck by it themselves, and should not have perceived the contradiction in which they involved themselves in speaking of God and human liberty at once. To have disregarded it, they must have considered this inconsistency or logical license practically necessary to humanity's well-being. Perhaps too, while speaking of liberty as something very respectable and very dear in their eyes, they give the term a meaning quite different from the conception entertained by us materialists and revolutionary socialists. Indeed, they never speak of it without immediately adding another word, authority, a word and a thing which we detest with all our heart. What is authority? It is the inevitable power of the natural laws which manifest themselves in the necessary condition and succession of the phenomena in the physical and social worlds.